I have this vague yet persistent memory of standing in the splash zone of the log flume ride with my family. I couldn't have been older than 6 or 7 at the time, and I remember when I was told I could go on it, I cried, as 6 or 7-year-olds often do. I don't remember why exactly I wasn't allowed to go on it, but what I do know is that ride closed down a few years later, and in the end, I never got the chance to.
Adventure Island is an amusement park. It sits on the coast of the town-10 city of Southend-on-Sea and has done so for over 100 years. Having been born and raised here, the park holds a pretty significant place in my heart and was a massive part of my childhood. I don't know about you, but when I feel nostalgia for a place, the nostalgia is like a hook that pulls me into its history. Not just the history of how things were when I was younger, but how things were before then. How the place became the place that I love so dearly.
Seeing as my last proper video project was released over 3 years ago, I figured I would try and channel my recent wave of nostalgia into something creative. A video that delves into the histories of both Adventure Island in general and my personal attachment to the park. I've been struggling to really define this video in my own head for quite a while now. It bounces between the lines of historical documentary and anecdotal sentimentality, but truthfully, I think it's a love letter to the park and to my childhood. This is my Adventure Island guide. So, shall we get started?
It's 1918, shortly after the end of World War I, and a small pleasure garden has opened to the west side of Southend Pier. The pier itself actually holds the accolade of being the longest pleasure pier in the world, and it's been around since 1889. But this isn't a Southend Pier video, that's the story best left for another time. The sunken gardens consisted of just some pretty nice scenery and greenery, oh, and a small children's playground, but that's barely worth mentioning. We're talking swings and slides at this point, not coasters and dodgems. By no account could this children's playground be considered an amusement park, and I imagine if you did call it that, you would have got some pretty funny looks. It certainly wouldn't help your case that around the same time, just down the road a bit, there was another park.
An actual honest-to-God amusement park. In fact, one of the first ever purpose-built amusement parks in the world.
At the time it would have been known as Luna Park, but we all know it today as the Kurzel,
which nowadays stands around being an abandoned bowling alley, a housing estate, and a Tesco Express. But I've got sidetracked, this is not a Kurzel video, I was talking about the Sunken Gardens.
In case it wasn't already obvious, the Sunken Gardens were the origins of what would one day be known as Adventure Island. I wasn't around for any of this, obviously, the park predates my grandparents, but I find the origins of this little amusement park so fascinating because it wasn't built from the ground up to be an amusement park, it evolved organically over time. Adventure Island is the garden that accidentally became an amusement park. In 1949, the park received the introduction of one of its oldest and longest standing attractions, one that is still alive and well in the park today. I am of course talking about the Crooked House. I think it's more than fair to call the Crooked House a historic landmark and an icon of Southend-on-Sea. It has gone through so many different renovations and paint jobs over the years. Heck, it even survived a flood in 1953, but it's always maintained the same iconic looks.
It may not look like much from the outside, and truth be told, by modern standards, it's not really much on the inside either. A simple walkthrough attraction with some animatronic tableau featuring a slightly creepy crooked man. In 2018, the park spent around £150,000 to give the ride a bit of a renovation to make it, I don't want to say worse, but it was a lot less creepy and a lot more bright neon lights with cute teddy bears and buttons that make fart noises. It was a different vibe, you know? Adventure Island does actually have a habit of doing this because this isn't the first old historic ride of theirs that they've given this treatment. In fact, the characters that now occupy the Crooked House were first established in what is now called Adventureville, which was a massive refurb of another one of their oldest rides called the Gold Mine, which actually was originally called Jigsaw Train and then became Gold Mine and then became Devil's Creek Gold Mine. Devil's Creek was my favourite version because they reused old models from Beelzy Bob's Trail, another old ghost train that used to exist in the park from 1999 through to 2007 and was one of my old favourite rides growing up. I realise I've gone way off the rails here, but I have to mention that after Beelzy Bob's Trail was eventually replaced in 2008 and then replaced-ish again in 2018, the ride that is now occupying its building is, you guessed it, covered in neon colours and cardboard cutout characters. I I promise I'm not bitter, I've noticed a trend and what was even my point? Christ, I was talking about the Crooked House.
To me, really, the Crooked House sort of encompasses the heart and soul of the park. It stands proud today, an artifact of history amongst its more modern surroundings, a reminder of the decades of history that laid the groundwork for what was to follow. That's a take. Over time, the Sunken Gardens Children's Playground came to be known as Peter Pan's Playground. Don't ask me why, I'm not sure, and neither was the internet. Maybe it's because Sunken Gardens Children's Playground is a bit of a mouthful, and after all, who doesn't love alliteration?
The official park website states that the name was changed in 1976, the year the park was bought by the Millers. I'm pretty sure I have significant evidence that the name was around much earlier than that, but let's stick with their version for the time being. The Millers are the family behind Stockvale Ltd, the company that has owned Adventure Island now for over 45 years, alongside several other South End attractions. Philip Miller, the main man, Mr. Adventure Island if you will, got his start in the theme park business through his dad, helping him out at the Kursaal running sideshows. The Kursaal being that other much larger amusement park that I mentioned earlier. Side note, Philip Miller and Stockvale Ltd actually expressed an interest a while back in adding the old Kursaal building to their collection of South End attractions, but the company who currently owns the building, AEW, and who have currently left it rotting away and falling apart, have a lease on it that is apparently set to last almost another 200 years, which seems to me an abnormally long lease period, but what do I know? I'm not in the business of owning buildings and probably never will be. God, the Kursaal keeps sneaking into this video. This is not a Kursaal video. By the late 1970s, Peter Pan's Playground was headed into liquidation, and the Miller family decided to buy it, saving the park from certain death. Philip Miller took control of the park from his family pretty early on, and one of his earliest moves once he was in charge of the park was to remove a small children's roller coaster that had been around since the early 1960s, called the Wendy Glide. The Wendy Glide, by the way, is the strong evidence I have that the name Peter Pan's Playground was around much earlier than the Millers were. I mean, besides the name of the ride itself, I found this old archive photo from the 60s, clearly advertising the new Wendy Glide under the banner for Peter Pan's Playground. So, yeah, there's that. Popeye is also there. Someone should have probably told them at some point that that is not Peter Pan. Credit where credit is due, Philip Miller took the park from the brink of bankruptcy to a whole new level of success. Under his leadership, there was a massive surge of exciting and new attractions for the park, including Space Chase, Telecombat Jets, Fantasy Dome. Hold that thought. That right there's the Fantasy Dome. Can we talk about the Fantasy Dome? I've been dying to talk to you about the Fantasy Dome all day. This ride makes no goddamn sense. I mean, there are photos online that prove that it existed. However, if you try and dig a little deeper, maybe figure out when the ride was built like I did, you will lose your goddamn mind. There is no record online of when this ride was built or when it was demolished. There are no photos of its inside, very few photos of the outside, so for the longest time my running theory had to be that at some point this mysterious white dome just apparated in the park one night and nobody batted an eye. This is some Area 51 level shit right here. I tried to tweet at Adventure Island asking them about the Fantasy Dome and they completely ignored me. Why do you think that is? You've got something to hide, Mr. Philip Miller? Tell us about the aliens, Philip. Tell us about the dome, Philip. Oh, wait, I just found this photo on Facebook of the ride in mid-construction. So, as you were. Bat Jets, Fantasy Dome, American Freeway, Skylab, Barracuda, and of course, the Raging River, all of which were sadly gone by the time I was old enough to truly appreciate the park.
But I remember when I was younger, I would read about all of these cool and interesting old attractions that were no longer around today, and I'd get this unique sense of FOMO. I think if I could travel to any point in the park's history, it would be to the mid to early 90s, so I could ride and relive all of these old attractions from a bygone era.
In 1995, Philip Miller and Stockvale Ltd bought the land to the east side of Southend Pier, doubling the size of the park overnight. And with this expansion came yet another change of identity. Peter Pan's no longer this was Adventure Island. Alongside this expansion came a boom of new things for the park, like rides, and mostly rides. It's an amusement park. For the next several years, the park would be getting at least a couple of new attractions every year, a lot of which went on to become some of the most iconic rides in the park, and some of my personal all-time favourites. Like the previously mentioned Billsy Bob's Trail, or the Ramba Zamba, the Green Scream, Skydrop, Barnstormer, Ferris Fury, Archeon, the Mighty Mini Mega. I could go on forever. But this period from 1995 through to 2005 was when the park truly became the version of Adventure Island that I grew up with. It was around this time in 2005 or 2006 when I would visit the park for the very first time, where it would embed itself permanently as part of me. I would find myself in one of my earliest living memories, standing in the splash zone of the log flume ride, the Raging River, which would go on to close down 1 year later, before I was ever old enough to even ride it. Look, I could pretend that the Raging River was like my long-lost rosebud, a symbol of my lost youth and innocence, and I'm going to. No, the truth is that I only really care about the ride closing down in retrospect. At the time, as a 9-year-old child, I was much more interested in what could be replacing it. As Sharpay Evans once sang, out with the old and in with the new. Well, with it being 2006 at the time, 9-year-old me had access to the wonders of the internet for 2 hours a day or so after school. And while I did spend most of that time playing RuneScape or playing Club Penguin or playing Habbo Hotel, I did at some stage get introduced to a beautiful, amazing, niche little corner of the internet known as the Adventure Island Guide Forum. Back in 2006, I used this website like people today use Twitter. Only this website actually contributed something positive to the world. You might think the web design looks a little bit shit by today's standards, and to that I would say, no, it doesn't. Shut up, and so's your mum. This forum was filled with people like me, the now me, people who cherished and grew up with the park just like I now have. They would post niche little bits of history about the park's past, photos and memories of the old attractions, and, of course, speculation, news and updates about upcoming attractions.
And it just so happened that replacing the Raging River was the park's biggest ride to date, a brand new roller coaster called Rage.
For superheroes only.
The old admin of the forum, who I actually tried to get in contact with for this video with sadly no luck, would post regular updates about the coaster, photos of the demolition of the old and consecutive construction of the new, and as a 9-year-old, to have that access, to be able to view in real time as a roller coaster is built from the ground up, not just that, but a roller coaster that I was eventually going to get to ride, I was obsessed.
When the ride finally opened in 2007, I went to the park with my brother and his friend, and I ended up riding Rage at least 10 times in a row. And that, my dear viewer, is my rosebud. That childlike moment of glee, anticipation and adrenaline. It was fantastic.
The Adventure Island Guide was the gateway drug of theme and amusement park obsession that set off the chain of cause and effect that eventually culminated in me spending half a year of my life to make this video. And I could not be more grateful. Adventure Island is an amusement park. It sits on the coast of the town-turned city of Southend-on-Sea, and I truly, sincerely love it with all of my heart. As I've gotten older, I found myself drifting apart a little bit from my hometown. Every time I visit Southend, things have changed that little bit more, and it's further and further removed from the town that I grew up in. I mean, it's not even a town anymore. Adventure Island's changed a lot too, but I feel no matter how much time I spend away from the park and how much it changes, it always still feels like my Adventure Island. Nowadays, the park is bigger than ever. Against all odds, it came out the other side of a global pandemic with barely a scratch on it. It's a resilient little park. In December, it opened up this brand new, stunning Ferris wheel, and it also has a TikTok account now, which is endearing, if a little bit cringy, but it warms my heart to see the park reaching a whole new audience of young people who, over the years, I'm sure will learn to love and cherish the park just as much as I do. 105 years and still going strong. Rides come and go as the years do, but I'll always be safe in the knowledge that somewhere in the ethereal subconscious of my mind, my childhood self is still truly alive and well.
and he is having the time of his life at Adventure Island. Dashing through the crooked house as fast as possible, reaching out and touching the leaves of the green screen, humming along to the over-the-hill ride music, and of course, going on rage over and over and over. Thank you for watching. Yeah, that's good.